Welcome to the Long March Forward in Voting Rights. I'm Margaret with Civic Nebraska Voting Rights Team, and today we're looking at the struggle for ballot access among the incarcerated and those with felony convictions. Just as they drew principles of democracy from the ancient Greeks, the men that drafted our Constitution borrowed the practice of withholding voting rights from some criminal offenses. The ancient Greeks called this atmia, which translates to an existence without honor or value. The punished would lose their voting rights and the ability to run for public office. Criminal disenfranchisement was common throughout Western civilization and would come ashore to the Americas with the English colonists in the early 1600s. During the Revolutionary period in the colonies, debate ensued as to whether voting was a right or a privilege. With its exclusion of women, people of color, and including property ownership as a requirement, it was difficult to sidestep the hypocrisy of establishing voting as a basic right while simultaneously denying suffrage to so many people. The colonists came to view voting as a privilege. As such, it could be taken from those that the state determined were unfit to cast a ballot. With the ratification of the U.S. Constitution in 1789, states were given the authority to determine for themselves who would be granted suffrage and allowed to vote. Kentucky became the first state to pass a law for criminal disenfranchisement when it ratified its state constitution in 1792. Laws shall be made to exclude from suffrage those who thereafter be convicted of bribery, perjury, forgery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Many state constitutions soon followed suit, rewriting felony disenfranchisement laws primarily in response to the 15th Amendment, which prohibited states from denying suffrage to black men. During the 1960s and 70s, both state and federal Supreme Courts would examine the issue of felony disenfranchisement many times. Some justices still held that the state had the authority to withdraw voting privileges from those who had broken the law, while the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals maintained that constitutional concepts should evolve along with modern concepts of justice and punishment. Earlier in our constitutional history, laws disenfranchising persons convicted of crime may have been immune from attack. But the constitutional concepts of equal protection are not immutably frozen like insects trapped in Devonian amber. In 1974, California voters passed Proposition 10, which restored voting rights to thousands of Californians. In the 1980s, the U.S. Supreme Court considered two cases on felony disenfranchisement, City of Mobile, Alabama, and Bolden and Hunter versus Underwood. Both cases centered around how criminal disenfranchisement disproportionately impacts black men. The court determined that purposeful racial discrimination must be evident for a disenfranchisement law to be unconstitutional, and criminal disenfranchisement is legal. It would fall to the states themselves to eliminate incarcerated and felony conviction disenfranchisement. Progress on the issue is difficult to gauge, with various states yo-yoing between expanding and retracting the voting rights of people with felony convictions. In Nebraska, in 2005, the legislature voted to abolish the lifetime ban on voting eligibility due to felony conviction, although a 2-year waiting period was added to the bill in order to get it passed. It has been difficult to get the waiting period removed. In 2017, Governor Ricketts vetoed LB 75, which would have restored voting rights upon the completion of sentence. He said, "Nebraskans are kind-hearted and do not wish to permanently punish convicted felons. The distinction, however, between the restoration of rights versus privileges must be noted," citing the very dilemma the founders faced when drafting our Constitution. Joining me today is Jasmine Harris. Jasmine is a policy advocate with RISE in Omaha. Thanks for joining me today, Jasmine.
Hi, Margaret. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us, what does voting mean to you?
Well, Margaret, to me, voting is basically a right that people have in order to dictate and put in input on how their life is going to be. So for me, that means I can vote to say this is how my streets are going to be, this is how my neighborhood is going to be, this is how my kids' education is going to be, this is how my life is going to be. And for me, that means power in how I am going to live my life.
Can you tell us, through your work with RISE, what are some of the barriers that incarcerated individuals face to access their voting rights?
As the Director of Policy and Advocacy, my job is to really advocate for people who are currently incarcerated and those who are coming home. So when you're talking about barriers that people face when it comes to people coming home from incarceration, voting is one of those barriers. And what we're looking at is how In Nebraska, we have a 2-year waiting period for someone who comes home from incarceration and they're told to get a job, pay taxes, but they do not have their right to vote. So what we're trying to advocate for is for that 2-year waiting period to be removed, because now people don't understand what that is for them, because if you have been released and you're on parole, you have to wait until your parole is over and then your 2-year waiting period begins, versus someone who comes right out and then they only have that 2-year waiting period. So what that means, someone can be on parole for 5-7 years and then wait 2 more years before they get the right to vote. So in that, they are maneuvering around their day-to-day life, paying taxes, trying to figure out how they live their lives, but they don't have any input when it comes to elected officials and how that happens. So that's one of the big barriers. So when we're looking at their rights and the other barriers they face, so when they're looking at housing, employment, transportation, when elected officials are making decisions on that, they don't have input on who those elected officials are going to be. Or if it's a ballot initiative, they don't have the right to go and vote as a citizen in the community on that initiative that's going to impact their life.
Tell us a little bit how civic participation can impact recidivism rates.
So when you're talking about civic participation and recidivism rates, what we have seen in research and what we have seen anecdotally when talking to people is that it really helps people feel like they belong. And for me, when you are feeling like you belong to a community, you're more apt to build that up than to tear it down. If I feel like I belong, I want to be able to participate in all aspects of that community. So when that right is stripped away from me, when I don't have it when I come back home, then why would I want to be around? Why would I want to help? Why would I want to feel like I'm a part of something when I don't totally have everything there? So what we've seen is that individuals who are currently incarcerated, they are more civically engaged than a lot of people who never have been incarcerated. I work with people who are saying, hey, I'm writing to senators. They're giving me policies that they would like to see introduced. They are up to date on all of their news and things that are going on in the legislature here at the state level. So they are really keyed in to what's going on. And there are some great advocates who are out here who have been incarcerated and impacted by the system, who know exactly where they want to fit in. And even though they don't have the right to vote, they are out really drumming up support in order to get the right to vote for everyone. One day I would love to see us like Maine, where that right is never taken away and people who are incarcerated can still vote while they're incarcerated.
Tell us, Jasmine, how can people get involved with your work at RISE?
People can get involved with RISE in multiple ways. The big thing about our program is that we are geared towards volunteer involvement. Before COVID, we were taking upwards of 40 people into facilities here in Nebraska when we had our business coaching days and our business pitch competitions and graduations. So now we have a digital version of that where people are able to give feedback on resumes and things like that. And then we're also doing a lot of the advocacy work. So if people want to get involved with RISE, you can find us at our website, www.seusrise.org. That's SEEUSRISE.org, or on Facebook and Instagram at seusrise. And then also I can be emailed at jharris@seusrise.org.
Thanks for joining me today, Jasmine.
Thank you, Margaret.
Civic Nebraska will continue to make felony conviction disenfranchisement a priority. If you would like to assist our efforts, visit civicnebraska.org or scan the QR code. You too can join the Long March Forward for Voting Rights.